Welcome to this week's watercolor tutorial. Today I decided to kind of move away from our nature-inspired pieces that we've been doing because I had a lot of requests for techniques. And what I decided to do was record 12 of my favorites for you all to get to see. So I'm going to guide you through these, and you can stop the video as often as you need to and restart it. And here we go. So gather up your paints, your brushes, a water jug, and plenty of paper. I have started by just taping my paper down and making 12 sections. You're welcome to do that. So our first technique is the traditional wet on wet. So you're going to apply clean water in spots or on the whole square if you've decided to do squares, and just gently dabbing. And you can see how the paint begins to immediately spread. And you can explore using different colors with this, or just stick with one and see what happens. Try some different brushes. What effects do you get when you start to spread it around? You can start to create some tones and different values. This is a great technique for creating atmospheric effects in a landscape, making water or sky. Very dreamy and just a lot of fun to see what happens when the colors just sort of blend into each other. Now, all of these will be a form of wet on wet, most of them. So it is my favorite way to use watercolor. This second technique is called charging. And what you do here is you're still dropping water on, but what you can do is start with a kind of a tone. So I'm starting with this orange tone already, and then just exploring what happens when I kind of drop it right on. So it can create some really neat color transitions. So sort of with some of that, even that thicker paint, and already starting with that base tone. So especially using that drop of thick paint with it, it really kind of blends out and can create some really neat circular effects. It's great for petals or leaves, or it's just fun to do for some abstract shapes and forms. Okay, our next one this is our third one. We're on wet on damp. So for this method, you're going to apply the paint onto the slightly damp paper. So you might have to wait 30 seconds or so. Just want the water to have a little bit of a chance to dry. So I've applied this first layer of blue, and now I'm going to wait. And this gives the paper time to kind of settle. And then using the same color after the paper has had time to dry, you go right on top of it. And while I'm waiting for it to dry, I'm just going back into my second one of charging, just to add a little more color to it. But I'm waiting for this third one to dry. And the reason I'm doing that is because when your paper has more or less water on it, it's going to create a different effect for the paint that you put on top. So if I give it a few seconds and then I go back in to create some more forms, lines, whatever, with the same color, it's going to give it a darker effect. So I'm going back in. This is great to make water. You can see it's still spreading a little bit, but not as much because the paper's had time to dry. So just applying this, and you could even do this a third time. You could let this layer dry and then go on top again. So just experimenting and enjoying the process. It's great for making those trees in the background too, when you want to have those different values, kind of the same color. Okay, we're going to go to a wet on wet with a thick dark paint starting out. So I'm applying my thin layer of water, and then with a lot of paint on my brush, I'm going to start to apply it to the wet surface and see what happens here. So you can see it really diffuses out in a more intense way the more paint that you put on your brush. It's kind of neat to do for maybe some dramatic areas where you're really trying to create a mood. And then allowing it a little bit of time to dry, and you see what can happen too. So there's actually a lot of depth just in this one little square, just from moving some paint around the paper with different amounts, and even letting the drying time vary slightly. Okay, so we're going to move on to 5A, which is a wet on wet gradient. I use this a lot for skies in my landscapes. So you want to start with that clean water and then begin by applying a single color. And you want to really try to keep this color very even if you can, and create a smooth fading gradient. So the top part or the bottom, whatever you're going for, is going to be darker, and it's gradually going to shift into this more subtle tone. This takes a little bit of work to master. It is hard to achieve this more solid look, and depending on the type of paper that you have, that can also alter your effects. It is great for painting those subtle soft backgrounds, water. Now I'm going to let that sit because I want to do 5B in that section. So I'm moving on right now to my 6th square, and we're going to come back to 5B. So this is the wet on wet gradient using 2 colors. So number 6 is very similar to 5, but I'm only going to go down so far with my darker paint that I'm putting there at the top, that blue. And then I'm going to kind of really fade it out with the water and apply another tone so I have 2 colors with that gradient. So dipping now into my raw sienna, and I'm just starting at that middle area, and I'm going to kind of bring the colors together where there is a part where they overlap, but there's also a definite section where it's just blue and just raw sienna. So the top blue and the bottom raw sienna. Think about like I guess a Venn diagram where you have that center overlap. So heading back over to 5 for a moment, just to work a little more on this. Sometimes you have to let it dry a bit and then come back into it to really get the effect that you're going for. And that's why watercolor is so beautiful, and can also just take a lot of time as you layer things in. So going back and forth here, giving the paint a little bit of time to dry, one to the next. And remember to blot your brush as often as necessary, and just really take your time here. So kind of fading out that middle area, going back and forth. Ultimately, you probably want to go one way, but you sometimes can create a saturated area just going back and forth with your brush stroke. And I do love those wide, flat brushes. They're great for doing the landscape and the sky. Okay, we are on to number 7, and this is blooming. So I've wet just a small area, and blooming occurs when you drop your water in an area and then you add a color, and then almost immediately after you add another color. So what this does is it blends the two. So we just created like an indigo color with our blue and our purple. And you can really experiment and get some really neat effects this way. One of my favorite techniques. It's great with ink as well. If you ever get a chance to try any drawing inks or acrylic inks, it's really fun to pour. Just watch it blend. Okay, we're going to go on to number 8, where we're pulling color. So I've laid wet paint down on this dry paper, and I'm just making my lines kind of as thick as I want. And now I'm going to start wetting my brush. So I'm dipping it in my water, and I'm pulling that thick line down or going across. But the idea here is that you're taking the paint and you're allowing it to kind of blend into the water. So here you really see it happening with that water line, and the paint is so thick at the top that it's just starting to sponge down toward the water. And sometimes you can hold your paper up or tilt it up. Oftentimes you don't even need to. It's a great technique for making shadows. I do this a lot under trees. Or even just adding depth in the landscapes in the sky. Okay, now this is number 9. We're on wet on dry. So again, similar to what I just did, no wetness on the paper. I'm just immediately laying my wet paint into the paper that is dry. So this is a wet on dry technique. And you can see you can really go quite a long ways with the amount of paint that's on it just being wet. So it does make your paint, it looks different than when you're using the wet on wet. And it's really nice for more controlled areas of a painting. After you do a background and you want to add branches after it's all dried, and you want to add branches or leaves or a bird, then you can go back in with this wet on dry technique. Okay, we're going to move on here and go to our wet on damp 2. So in this variation of wet on damp, the paper is slightly wetter than the previous method. And what happens is you just get more flow, more blending. It is a little bit controlled. So again, allowing for that drying time. You get your blow dryer out, or if you can just let it sit. It's really good for those kind of foggy landscapes, muted backgrounds, things like that. And you can also try taking paint away. Here, that's another thing you can do. And I'm using just a scrap of paper to create an edge. Sometimes you have to let it dry longer before you try to take it out. Otherwise, the paint just seeps in. You can also use a towel. You can even just use your brush and kind of wipe it away as it begins to dry. That works really well. So you can sort of see it starting to show up as a white line here. Okay, now I'm going back into it after it has had some time to dry. Starting to see some of those value shifts and creating an orange yellow. I'm going to go back in with my towel now. This is nice for creating clouds in skies. with the dry brush, you can remove paint. Okay, so we are ready for our 11th square here, and this is a technique known as glazing. And glazing, I will probably do a longer tutorial just on glazing. It's the process of kind of laying those really thin, transparent washes over the base layer. You're really building up the color, and it creates a great depth. Can take a little while to achieve this. It really adds a lot of luminosity, and it's great for flowers, landscapes, really anything. So you can see I've added my first layer, light wash, and then I'm going to, and you're really just using all of these techniques all the time, right? We have to really let our intuition guide us with watercolor. I feel like it's such a great medium for play and just letting go. But you are using blooming, you are using, wet on damp, you are using dry brush. It's the coming together of all of the techniques that really makes the work have the rich feeling. But with the glazing, you just want to take your time and allow it to dry as much as you can. And the more you do it, the more you get the hang of it. So practice definitely as often as you can. Just going to go around and fill in some of these petals with another layer of that orangey red. And it's starting to bleed in to the purple a bit. All right, so my final, and probably one of my favorite ways to use watercolor paint is to draw an image using just clear water. So I've drawn a really simple tree here, and I'm going to show you how I just drip pigment in, and it spreads and stays within the form. So you really do build up the layers here. And you can do a little bit of regular painting, but dripping it in is just so neat. It just stays right in those lines, and you start to see the image emerge. It's also a great way to have some areas darker where you don't have an outline like you can sometimes feel like you have. It just all bleeds together, and you really begin to create form with color. Well, I hope that you all have enjoyed this tutorial. I'm going to keep checking the comments to see if anyone has any questions, thoughts, anything. I'll probably go back into my flower some more here and keep working on it, adding my layers as they dry. And let me know if you have any more ideas for tutorials. I always love to hear what people would like to do. So thanks for joining me, and I will see you next time.